So, we all stand on this crossroad. Everybody here in this room, everybody in Amsterdam, everybody on this planet. And this crossroad is characterized by one major historic event. And I will take you on a thought experiment in order to give you an idea of what this historic event is and how big it is. If you look in the last 100 years, I think the most of you would agree with me that the World War I and World War II were pretty historic events in the last 100 years, defining how this last century would look like. Something funny happens when you zoom out, when you look at not only the last 100 years, but the last 1,000 years. Then something funny happens because there are other events happening in this timeline that is of the same kind of importance, if not more important, in defining the state of the Earth at this moment. Think about the century of Enlightenment, the invention of the printing press, or the invention of the hand cannon. You can zoom out even more, and then you have something that happened in history that dwarfs those of the World War I and World War II. Think about the invention of democracy, or the invention of the wheel. Something interesting happens when you look even further back in time, and you look at 500 million years ago. Then suddenly these 6 events pop up. Can somebody tell me what these 6 events represent?
Fire?
Perfect. No, not fire, but he was right. These are the 6 mass extinction events. And sadly for us, the 6th one is happening right now. And this gives you a little bit of an idea of the scale of the situation that we are right in now. It dwarfs that of the world wars that we have had before in the last 100 years. And this is also the major reason for me as a motivation of what I do and why I do what I do. And that is, I'm a marine biologist, and the last 7 years I've been working with seaweed. And I've been building seaweed farms along the northwestern coast of Europe. At the same time, I've been breeding seaweeds. And the last 2 years, I started my PhD. And during this PhD, I tried to research the life cycle of kelp. Seaweed, the brown seaweed kelp. And with the research of the life cycle of kelp, the main goal of it was to domesticate it. So if you understand the life cycle of kelp, then you could domesticate it, then you make it a crop. And once you make it a crop, you can use it the same way as that we use carrots or apples or potatoes. So, but what is seaweed? So you have to understand that the genetic diversity or the diversity underwater is mind-boggling. And I think it's the understatement of the year when you say that everything under the seawater is seaweeds. You have 3 major groups. You have the brown seaweeds, if the laser works. And on this side, the kelps, you have the green seaweeds, the great-grandparents of all plants on Earth, and the red seaweeds. To give you an idea of the scope of the genetic diversity under the sea, you have to understand that the brown seaweeds here, they differ genetically more from green seaweeds than we do from mushrooms. That's how big the genetic diversity is. And then a cool thing is happening the last couple of years. So the interest of seaweed is increasing. A lot of people use it nowadays because seaweed is a health product, because it's a healthy thing. But there's another force driving the interest of seaweeds. Now in Amsterdam you find, for example, the Dutch wheat burger. You can find soap made out of seaweed. And in the supermarket you find bags of seaweed which you can use as, for example, a replacement of pasta. So what is the driving force next to that we find it a health food? What's the next driving force why we are so interested in seaweed? It is divided in these 3 categories. You start with climate change. And with climate change, I mean everything concerning climate change. I'm talking about oceanic acidification. I'm talking about the oceanic anoxic events. I'm talking about coral bleaching. I'm talking about the methane coming out of the permafrost. I'm talking about the ecological decimation and the deforestation, etc., etc., etc. It's a long list. Combine that with a human population that in the next 30 years will increase until 10 billion, with the side note that at the same time those people will have an increase in wealth, let's say not an increase in wealth, but an increase in footprint, you understand that the pressure on Earth is increasing. And so we need to find ways to relieve the pressure. And one of those relief valves is future food. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. And future foods, we have many different kinds of future foods, and I try to categorize them a little bit. And I found these 6 categories. So the first one is the one you find nowadays a lot in supermarkets. It's in a way the simulation of in this case a hamburger, for example, and you can use, instead of hamburger meat from the cow, you can use mushrooms or chickpeas or something like that. Another one is a novel food source. So instead of using the meat of cows or pigs, you can try to use the meat of insects. Insects, they use much less water than the cows and the meats, and they have a much higher feed to meat conversion ratio. So as a meat source, it's much more sustainable. The third one is novel farming locations. That is what I'm doing with the seaweeds. So we never used the ocean before as a farming location here in Europe, but you can also think, for example, at farming on places like the Sahara, so in the middle of the desert. Then we go to the more futuristic types of food. Food simulation. So food simulation, what I mean with this is try to simulate a certain food with a different food source. In this case, hamburger meat simulated with vegetarian origin, and they're pretty good at it. These days. You have, for example, the Beyond Burger, that it's so good that they claim at least that it tastes like real meat and it even bleeds like real meat. A novel food production. So think about, okay, the cow and the pig, you can consider them a little bit as a meat factory. Let's change up the meat factory and produce the meat somewhere else. So the end product is the same, but the origin of that end product is a different one. And the last one is my favorite, is the terra incognita. So we have no idea what technology will bring in the near future. So what are the characteristics of these future foods? All these future foods, they have to have either one of these characteristics or a little bit of all 3. So one is higher yields. So you have a little bit, the same input, but you increase the output. You can also look at resource efficiency. And the resource efficiency is more like you have the same output, but you decrease the input. It looks the same as the higher yield, but it's fundamentally different. Or you can have sustainable production, where you have the same input, you have the same output, but the process of producing it, it has a lesser impact on the surroundings. And the cool thing about seaweed is that it has a little bit of all 3. So with seaweed, you can still breed, so you can still get, with the same input, a higher output. You can create more resource-efficient types of farms. So we have been experimenting in Norway with seaweed farms building around salmon farms. So the effluent of the salmon farm, those nutrients are getting absorbed by the seaweeds, thus growing them harder. And at the same time, those seaweeds make the whole concept of salmon farming a much greener product. And the third one, and in my opinion the most important one, is sustainable production. So seaweed doesn't use fresh water, it doesn't use fertilizer, it doesn't use arable land. It's a very sustainable product. And the cool thing is that those 3D structures that you see here can even be a home for fish. So how does this whole idea of seaweed fit in the bigger picture? So we're not only having a problem with food, we're also having a problem with energy. We have political problems, inequality, for example, and or artificial intelligence. For that, I started to look at futurists. Futurists, those are people who look at the future, who try to make sense of the future, and in a way they can function as a sort of roadmap for me. The most famous one is, I think most of you know him, Elon Musk. He's the founder of Tesla, and next to Tesla also SpaceX or the Bohr company. But you have many more. You have Ray Kurzweil, who thought of the whole concept of the singularity event, where artificial intelligence becomes more intelligent than we are, thus creating singularity. Amy Webb, Peter Thiel, who is the thought father of seasteading, and he tries to build humongous cities in the middle of the ocean. Anneliese Kier, who looks at how technology shapes society and thinks of how culture will evolve around it. And Yuval Harari, and I think a lot of you have read his books, Sapien, Homo Deus, and he's a historian, and he tries to, in a way, look at the future using history. So you have many futurists, and all those futurists have different ideas. And how do you make sense of it? Luckily, there's a research journalist who thought about it for us. And he looked at all those futurists, and he could divide them into two different groups. You had the wizards, and those wizards, I hope you, by the way, you like the epic pictures I took. It's nerd night after all. But so you have the wizards, and those wizards, they want everything centralized. They want everything more efficient and more industrialized in order to feed the 10 billion people on Earth. And on the other hand, the prophets. And the prophets, they are more in touch with nature. They want everything decentralized, more organic. They want to go back to what we were. And it's a battle between those two. And the prophet will look at the wizard and would think, well, how can the solution to the whole problem of overproduction be to produce even more, but only more efficient? How can it be? But the wizard will look at the prophet and say, yeah, it's all nice and clear what you want to do, but how can you convince 10 billion people to live like the way you want to do? Because we have a deadline for only 10 or 20 years. So this whole struggle, you see it in everything in life, the struggle between the wizards and the prophets. Lately there was a discussion with, I don't know, the Dutch people will know Arjen Lubach, where he was talking about the whole idea of nuclear energy not being such a bad product. That's a wizard speaking. He says, no, we have a deadline. We have 10 to 20 years to find solutions. Nuclear energy is a really nice way to produce clean energy. While the prophet says, no, nuclear waste is per definition not clean. So we should not think about nuclear energy. Same discussion you have with pro-GMO and no GMO. GMO stands for genetically modified organisms, where the wizard would say, yes, of course, GMO. GMO, we can do magnificent things with GMO. And if we want to feed 10 billion people, we need it. A prophet would say, but we have no idea what GMO will do to a human if you give it enough. We have no idea what the consequences are. So for me, as a seaweed researcher, I need to place myself somewhere. Am I a wizard? Am I a prophet? You know, which side of the aisle am I choosing? And then I realized that there is a third group, and that is us. We are the people who are going to decide which side we're going to choose, whether it's wizard or prophet. And so this whole discussion can be placed as in the seaweed sector, and I can be the seaweed wizard. And I could promote large-scale seaweed aquaculture in the middle of the ocean. Try to aim for a very low-value product. And because you make very low-value product, you can have more end product. So you can do, for example, for bioplastics, for biofuels. Very industrialized. Or I can be the seaweed prophet, where I promote small-scale farms along the coast. Aim for high-value products for human consumption, for example, and be more organic. So this ideological dilemma finds its way in my work. So, for example, if I want to look at with whom I'm going to cooperate, will I be open enough to work with large multinationals? A wizard would say, definitely yes. They have the money, they have the power, they can get you where you want to be. While the prophet would say, of course not. You have the chance to make everything as equal as possible. Same goes for GMO, where the wizard would, of course, say, yes, of course, GMO, in the middle of the ocean. We can do magic there. Another one is, how fast do we grow as an industry? And it's an important one. So a wizard would say, if we have the chance, we will grow as fast as possible. And the prophet would say, yes, it's all nice and cozy, but you have no idea what these large-scale seaweed farms, what kind of consequences they have on their surroundings. So you should step on the brake a little bit. I also have a little bit of a more personal story about this. So I've been working with the kelp, and I've been working with the life cycle of kelp, and during that period I developed a new type of bioreactor. And my dilemma was, should I patent it or should I make it open source? The wizard would say, yes, of course, patent it, because you make the whole product more interesting for investors to invest in. Well, open source people, while the prophets would say, no, if you make it open source, everybody has access to your product, so you make a more equal terrain. So in my case, in this case, I made it open source. We can discuss later, if you want, of the why I made it open source. But, so here we are, everybody. We are standing on the same crossroads, and it is up to you to decide if you go left or right. Thank you very much.